Welcome to Inside Media here at the Newseum in the Night Studio. Today we have a very special guest and a good friend of mine, Phil McKinney. He had a long career within the technology business and was recently the Chief Technology Officer for Hewlett-Packard's Personal Systems Group, which is where he worked with the Newseum on the development of the HP New Media Gallery. And at the beginning of this month, he was appointed the CEO of Cable Labs, which is a very interesting consortium of research among all the different cable companies to help them develop new technology for providing video and interactivity and broadband to the homes. But we're going to go back in time, the Wayback Machine, and ask you to talk about your first job in technology.
Oh man, my first job in technology. It was actually a division of Prentice Hall Publishing. So I guess it makes perfect sense now that I'm out on the book tour. So right out of college, I got recruited by a guy by the name of Bob Davis, who was a very early mentor of mine, and brought me in. It was a brand new company developing software for this very new technology called a PC.
Now what is a PC again?
So in the case of the, so this is back in the old original DOS days and the Apple II. And so I led the development effort for some of the very early software that came out on the IBM products and Apple products back then. So right from the beginning, it was in that space, and then most recently, also with the PC division, I just couldn't quite get out of that track for the 30 years of my career.
Now you have worked with a number of interesting people. Who was the most interesting person that you worked with during your career?
Ooh, most interesting person to work with. Well, everybody always wants to ask about Steve Jobs stories, right? So, in fact, with Steve's recent passing, I got called by a reporter asking for a Steve Jobs story, and I had to point out the fact that Steve and I knew each other, but not in the work context. Interestingly enough, both of our sons competed against each other in fencing. My son is a nationally ranked fencer and has taken the bronze and silver at the U.S. Nationals finals. And so my son and Steve's son had met each other and fenced, and I have to give Steve credit. He was at all the fencing competitions. So Steve and I knew each other as fathers supporting our sons in sports, never in the competitive world, except for the fact that my son won all the competitions against Steve's son. So I take comfort in that.
On the professional side, Steve might have won a little bit more often.
I'll give Steve from the standpoint of very creative, very strong opinions on what customers want. One question we get, a lot of time in the Valley is companies want to be more like Apple or Google or Facebook or LinkedIn. And what I have to remind people is there's a unique structure amongst those companies. The fact is that they are all run by founder CEOs, which have an ability to take risk that non-founder CEOs cannot take. A non-founder CEO is an employee. And so Steve, or whether it's the Google boys or Mark, or the high-profile companies that we all see coming out of Silicon Valley, they have that unique structure that they can take risk, which is critical to deliver the kind of breakthrough innovations that they're trying to drive. The real question is how do you maintain that level of risk-taking post the founders leaving the organizations? I mean, even at HP with Bill Hewlett and David Packard, they took risks that any current CEO at HP would never be able to take.
Well, there's a parallel between risk and innovation. And we're sort of at the fourth generation of Silicon Valley companies at this point. And you've seen several of those iterations. And the companies that survive are those that are capable of innovating on an almost daily basis, accepting risk, and understanding that the business is going to be in a different place 2 months from now than it is right now. How do you deal with that internally as an organization? How do you say, okay, everything we're doing now, we have to change, and we have to be changing it while we're riding this bicycle? How do you do that?
Well, the fact of the matter is innovation is about change, because you're trying to deliver something that nobody else has even thought of, which therefore you're actually introducing something that changes even consumers' lives. Smartphones and tablets and slates injected change into the customers' lives. So the question becomes down to is, how do you continue to do the change? When organizations become successful, they want to over-embrace that success, and they think that if they can continue to do the same thing the same way, success continues, and that's not the case. Unfortunately, the way innovation gets driven, even in the Valley, is with those organizations that find themselves in trouble. It's that reaction. I mean, think back to Apple. Apple almost went out of business right after Steve came back to run Apple. They were down to, you know, I don't know, rumor was they were down to only having cash on hand to last months. And it actually took an investment from Bill Gates to save Apple, right? It's in those cases where you have severe stress into the system that people then recognize they have to let go of the old and go after the new. Companies that are highly successful have a real hard time letting go of the old stuff and embracing the new.
Look at the newspaper business as a perfect example of an business that had a real hard time giving up high profit margin business model.
Or the book publishing
Or the
industry.
book publishing industry.
Right.
We'll look at the book in a second.
So the challenge becomes, how do you maintain the change? The problem is it's a little bit of human nature. We all mentally get around the fact that change is important and we need to make changes, and I'm all for change. The reality, though, is when we think about change inside of an organization, yeah, we need to change. What we need to do is, you need to change, I'm fine. And if you change, we're good,
Right.
type of thing. When in reality, we all need to change, and we all need to be able to go after those new things. Be willing to let go of the old, step out, take that risk. Now, risk is scary, right? Because failure, is a problem. You got to get used to the fact that out of 10 programs, 9 of them are going to fail. And you build that into the culture of your organization. I mean, the one CEO that I hold up is the CEO that I've spent a fair amount of time with, who really understands risk, is Jeffrey Katzenberg from DreamWorks. Think about it. They've got the new Madagascar movies out. It costs them $1 million a minute to make one of those films. So that's, it's $120 million to make the film. They'll put another $170 million into the marketing of it. So $300 million before they sell ticket number 1 to try to make the money back. So they're betting $300 million on every movie they put out. And you have to have an organization, a leadership, a board that's comfortable with the fact that they can manage that risk and take it and not be second guessing themselves.
Now, producing a new product in the technology community is also a high-risk venture because of the capitalization required, both in development, technology development, and then manufacturing, especially at global scale. HP is the largest computer maker in the world, and has a global supply chain that's unbelievably complicated. And you were the head of the HP Labs, which is where all the innovative technology was designed there. Some of the things we do in the New Media Gallery came out of HP Labs and hadn't been installed anywhere in public before. Talk a little bit about how a product is actually conceived, developed, prototyped, and then manufactured on a global scale so that you can ship 500,000 or 1 million units on the same day.
Well, I mean, just to put you in scale, HP will ship 40 to 50 million PCs and laptops in any given year. You talked about the supply chain. HP's supply chain is north of about $50 billion of raw commodities. That's memory, hard drives, LCD glass. It's the largest technology supply chain in the world. And it's through that scale and size that HP gets its advantage in the marketplace. But the process of going from an idea to a product is pretty much the same. If it's the next version of a laptop, that's pretty well understood. The challenge comes in is when you want to do something really innovative and different. You basically inject sand into the process. So at HP, we put a process in place called the Innovation Program Office. And the Innovation Program Office was about identifying, incubating, and launching. So the first thing we would do is, do we think the problem really exists? How do you go out and find it? We did a product for the international market, and we actually went to India for an emerging market, and we visited 2,600 homes in middle and lower class in India to determine what their real challenges were. Once you do that, then you actually mock something up. We do some rough prototyping. Then we actually hand build a couple hundred devices. And
What was the most important thing you learned when you visited those homes?
Well, what's interesting is everybody in the PC industry assumed that if you want to go into emerging markets, the way you do that is make it cheap. Make a $100 PC, it'll take off like gangbusters. After visiting 2,600 homes, not the case. Price actually wasn't even the issue. 2 fundamental characteristics: simplicity and relevance. fear of the PC, meaning, let's face it, the PC is a Swiss Army knife. It does everything and nothing at the same time. You don't really get the benefit of a PC until you start layering on applications on top of it. So we created a product that, for all intents and purposes, has no operating system. Very much of a cloud-based browser model, the model that I fully believe is the model where the PC industry is going to be in the next 3 to 5 years, where the role of a traditional operating system just isn't there, and this was our experimentation. So we built up some mock-ups. Then we moved on to, we built about 250 devices. We put it in people's homes. We tested the ability to be sold in retail, and then we did a worldwide launch of that product. The interesting thing is those 250 prototypes, we never got back. And that's my test that the product really is something that the marketplace is going to embrace, is when the consumers are so passionate about what it is you're delivering that you literally are needing to pry them out of their hands in order to get those products back.
Do you think the iPhone was the most disruptive new technology that we've seen in the last 20 years?
Well, I mean, the smartphone had been around for for a while, so it wasn't, the iPhone wasn't like the concept. What I believe Apple did and did very, very well was understanding that it isn't just about the phone, it's not just about the software, it's about that entire experience and the ecosystem. The ecosystem that they had the foresight to start building up, with the iPod and the iTouch and all those, the applications that were running on those platforms, and bringing that on to the smartphone. So it was less of a phone than it was a mobile computing platform that had a history of leveraging a foundation that was way ahead. It wasn't like, okay, I've got this new phone and now try to solve it all in one fell swoop. So, Apple gets credit, it deserves the credit for having that foresight and laying out how do you bring the consumer along into an entirely new paradigm. And I think that's where, Apple has its advantage in the marketplace.
As you're looking ahead 5 years, you just mentioned you think that the PC business is going to go basically a cloud-based system. How do you get from here to there? How do we get from I'm used to buying my software at Best Buy and coming home and plugging it into my computer with the CD? How do I make that jump to a truly cloud-based system?
Well, I think the consumers are there already, right? I mean, you don't have to install a disk to get onto Facebook, or YouTube. So from that standpoint, I think the marketplace is already there. The consumers are coming along. I mean, it's not going to be universal. It's not like, okay, PC's dead, and you move on, because there are certain types of applications that just you're going to need local compute. You're going to need local resources. So things like, video editing and music editing and 3D design and CAD work, those types of things. Content creation, you still need that compute. But content consumption, watching YouTube, updating your Facebook page, reading the newspaper, reading magazines, that has already shifted, and the marketplace is actually quite comfortable with that paradigm shift as it is. I mean, look, I'm using QuickBooks for tracking all my costs and investments I'm making in my book tour, and I'm doing that all online. I don't have a local version of QuickBooks running on my PC anymore like I used to 3 or 4 years ago.
Now, when you left HP, you decided you were going to take some time to think about it, and you came out with this book, Beyond the Obvious, which is really your sort of textbook on how to innovate, how to, it's like a cookbook. Here are the steps you do if you really want to be a successful company, and it applies not just to technology companies, it really applies to anyone across the board.
Correct.
So what were you trying to do when you set out to write this book, and how far did that vary as you actually published the book?
Well, I'll give you a little bit of history. The content that's in the book has been content that I've been creating probably over the last dozen years or so. A lot of the content comes off of the podcast, Killer Innovations, which is now just past its 7th year. I jokingly have to remind people that I was doing podcasts before iTunes. That tells you how old I am, right? But the content, or the focus was, and really the purpose of my blog and the podcast was to pay it forward. Bob Davis, as I mentioned before, was a really early mentor of mine, phenomenal guy, invested a huge amount of time in helping me get my career established. And I asked him, how would I pay it back to him? And he's like, you can't. You have to pay it forward. Find people later in your career after you've achieved your success and freely give away. So everything in the podcast, everything on the blog site is given away for free of charge as a way for me to pay it forward. When I got approached to write the book from an editor and agent in New York, I was a little taken back. You know, I already had a full-time job. I travel 300,000 miles a year. How do you pull all this together? But they actually help.
So you get frequent flyer miles?
I get a lot of frequent flyer miles. I can't burn frequent flyer miles fast enough. So they actually helped pull together a team that basically took the podcast and the blog, which is really about teaching people how to unlock their own personal creativity. How do you find that spark in yourself? My belief is that everybody is creative. We may have convinced ourselves, or school may have convinced us, or work may have convinced us that we're not creative. We are all creative. The question is that we've either have never been we've never been taught how to find that spark, or what do you do with it when you do find that point of inspiration. And so the purpose of the book is to really help people find that spark, and then what you do with it after you've found the thing that you're really passionate about, and what are you going to do next with it. So the book proposal was put together, went out to the publishers. Hyperion ended up winning the process of selecting the publisher. So interestingly enough, you know, you sign your book deal, and basically in 7 months I had to write 75,000 words. You never realize how many words 75,000 words is until you got to deliver it. I hit that word count button a few times in Word to see how far I was.
20,000, 21,000,
Well, it's like-
22,000.
Well, think about it in school, right? You know, you had to do the 500-word essay, and you're going 497, 498. Crap, I'm too short. You
the
know?
end. There we go.
You know, same thing in the book. You know, I hit that, and you know, it's like 50,000 words. I'm like, oh man, I still got 25,000 to go. But you know, the fact that I had a huge amount of content already in place was a big help, and the theme of the book stayed pretty solid from the beginning and the end. The one thing I did on the book that's different a little bit than the podcast was de-emphasize tech and physical products and generalize the methodology. So it applies to whether it's physical products, services, experience. I've got one guy who's a reader who bought the book, who's a chef with a bunch of restaurants, and he uses the approach to create new signature dishes for his restaurants. I've got a mother up in the Northeast who uses the approach with her family to brainstorm and come up with better ideas for their annual family vacation. There's 2 case studies in the book. One is the U.S. Department of Education, and then the other is Kroger Foods. I picked specifically those case studies, organizations that use the methodology and the approaches from the book to be completely different from tech, in order to show that it's universal. It doesn't matter what your job is, what industry you're in, whether you're a homemaker or whether you're a CEO at a Fortune 50 company. The fundamental skill of identifying an idea, incubating that idea, and then doing something with that idea is the same.
One of the central themes of the book, and the idea you keep coming back to, is the killer question. The idea being that you really want to be effective in as a change agent within a company or as an innovator, is that you have to understand what the questions are. Talk a little bit about the killer questions and how people can apply that, whatever it is that they're doing.
Well, the whole premise of the approach is based on this concept of what I call the power of question. Question has a very unique power in the fact that if I ask you a question, you cannot stop answering it in your head. So if I ask you the question, for instance, what's half of 13? You've now calculated the answer, and you're back listening to me. So the answer everybody comes up with is what, 6.5. That also points out one of the challenges we have with our own personal creativity. When I'm posed with a problem, I look for that first answer and I stop. We don't go beyond the obvious first answer. So in this case, 6.5. Well, there's actually lots of possible answers to the question of what's half of 13. If I wrote it out, T-H-I-R-T-E-N, I split the word. If I write the number out, 13, I split it, it's 1 and 3. If I wrote it out as Roman numeral 13, it's 11 and 2. If I split it vertically. If I split it horizontally, it's Roman numeral 8 and 8. Lots of different answers. One of the challenges in personal creativity is that we stop at that first obvious answer, and everybody else stops at that first obvious answer. How do you get yourself to get comfortable looking beyond and look for the other possible ideas that nobody else has looked at. So there's a unique structure around what I call killer questions. Killer questions are questions that are worded in such a way you can't answer them. There's no empirical way to validate the information. It requires that you need to get up out of your chair, and through the process of discovering the answer, that's when you uncover the opportunities for innovation.
And how do you apply that? If you're at a company that has reached hit the wall and it's facing intense competition, it's struggling to understand how to integrate new media, how to integrate new generation of workers, what's the killer question process? You describe it in here as a series of steps. Talk us through that.
Well, the steps that we talk about, and really I want to be clear on one area. There's a lot of people out there who are trying to profess, follow my 12-step process for innovation and magic happens. It's bunk. Every organization, every culture, every team is different. You need to go off and learn what the best are doing and then modify it. But there's 4 fundamental elements you have to have in the process. One is you have to have focus. One thing that happens a lot of times when people are off saying, okay, we got a problem, we have to hurry up and come up with a new product or a new service or solve an issue we've got, is they don't bring focus to it. They leave it open-ended thinking that will generate the most ideas. It's actually counterintuitive. The real answer is the more focus you bring, the wider the set of the answers you get. The more answers, the better quality answers you get. Second is you got to have a process to come up with ideas. What's the right set of killer questions? Killer questions are grouped into 3 areas: who, what, and how. Who? How do you innovate and think differently about your customers? One of the killer questions is what are the customer segments going to look like 5 years from now, right? So think of customer segments. We all know what a yuppie is, right? What's a yuffie? Young urban failures. These are typically.
You got any of those here?
Yeah, the yuppies are typical. The yuppies is what we refer to as the people who want to live like yuppies but don't have the paycheck to support it. And typically they end up back on the couch at mom and dad's. Woofs, well-off older folks. Mobies and dobies, mother, daddy, older, baby, younger, waiting late in life. How do you think differently about your mother, daddy, older, baby, younger? It's this issue of either one or both of the parents being late in life, starting their families. And it's a trend that's happening, and it has a huge issue depending on what products and services that you want to create. Sandwichers. Sandwichers are people who are taking care of their parents and taking care of their kids at the same time, and the stress that causes. The key is when you think about who, how do you think differently about your customer? The what, how do you think about the products or services you're offering? 95% of all innovation focuses on the what, which is actually a mistake. You need to think about all 3 of these areas. And then the how does your business operate? All the boring stuff, supply chain, logistics, sales, marketing, legal, finance. Once you've got that, then you've got your focus, you got better ideas, then you got to rank them. Because you come up with lots of ideas. We operate particularly, depending on the industry you're in, but in Silicon Valley, we're in an idea-rich environment. We don't lack for ideas. The question is what are the best ideas to work on?
Which ideas move forward?
Right, which ideas, if you got 200 ideas, how do you find the 2 that are really, really good? So how do you rank them? And then you got to execute. Ideas without execution are a hobby. And I'm not in the hobby business. There's lots of people who come up with great ideas, but they actually can't drive to the execution. So how do you execute? How do you translate that?
Fire, right? Isn't that?
Yeah, that's right. Focus, ideation, ranking, and execution.
Right.
And so no matter what approach you use, you have to have those 4 elements. If you're missing one of those elements, that's when the wheels fall off the bus.
Right. Now, you do talk about the education department in here, and it's a very interesting case study. Do you want to go through that a little bit, and then we'll take some questions from the audience?
Yeah, so this was, I don't know, it's now got to be 3 or 4 years ago. I got invited to a U.S. Department of Education event in Silicon Valley. And
you don't think of the Department of Education as particularly innovative, it's...
Well, and Jim Shelton, who's the Deputy Secretary of Education in charge of innovation. Phenomenal guy, phenomenally tough job. Reports to Duncan as Secretary of Education. He was hosting this event, and I'm at this event in Silicon Valley, and there's maybe 15 of us in the room. I'm the only non-educator. So they go around the room, they get to me, and they're asking me like, Phil, so what's your thoughts? I said, well, I'm not an educator. I don't know how to design curriculums. I said, I'm a consumer of your output. I hire engineers, I hire scientists, marketing people to work in my organization. The problem is what you're producing, I don't want. You know, you're not producing the workforce that I at HP need. We don't, we're missing the creativity, we're missing the critical thinking skills, those kinds of things. And so that then prompted, 5 trips to Washington, D.C. to explain my comment and what did I really mean by this. And as a result of that, I was asked to take a look at, could I create an approach that could be used both in a classroom, school, state, national level to change the conversation. You know, come up with ideas, but rather than every constituents, teachers and parents and,
Factions.
Everybody who has a strong opinion, how do you bring them together and come up with it? So the case study in the book talks about the process of me coming up with an approach for the U.S. Department of Education, and then we share the results of one of the test workshops that we've done. So now this is in the process. It's been given away, and people are downloading it off the site and trying it out, and we're getting good results. And so,
Well, I can talk about one example of innovation here that we were, when we were designing the new media gallery, several of the challenges had to do that we were designing a gallery for technology that hadn't quite been invented yet. The labs had these ideas and we saw the prototypes, but they didn't actually exist as products. So we had to design a gallery and interactive displays for things that didn't exist. And the touch wall in there, which is, if you've seen it, it's 6 monitors together that has this beautiful interface. Well, originally it was actually 9 monitors. And as we were working with these 9 monitors, 3 by 3, you realized that no matter how you positioned them, you couldn't touch the top one because the top of the monitors were too high and the bottom of the monitors were too low. So as we're trying to figure out how we're going to design the interface so people can use it, these guys say, well, why don't we just get rid of that top row of monitors and just make it 6 monitors? And then all of the useful space is right where people can reach it. And the kids can get the bottom part, the adults can get the top part. And the HP Labs folks who were designing this kept changing the monitors they were using. And so it was this constant back and forth iteration of what do we need, what's going to work. You had several that you had installed, right? Mm-hmm. And that's how you were dealing with the question at the same time we were.
Well, I mean, let's face it, innovation is messy. I tell people, people think, oh, can you put a process around to start at point A and come out the other end and magic happens? No, it's messy. It's like the old joke, if you like sausage, don't watch how sausage is made. Right. If you like the output of innovation, don't watch too closely because it's messy. You were forced to live in the middle of the messiness as we were literally inventing the technologies for the new media gallery because in many cases, none of those technologies had ever existed, and we clearly had never shown them outside the walls of HP Labs, which was really the objective. R&D that just lives in a lab is not all that useful. One of the things that I pushed very hard with the researchers at HP, and my new team at Cable Labs is now getting this experience, which is get it out, put it out in people's hands. That's, when you can get it involved and engaged with people who are actually using it day in and day out, there's nothing better in the form of the feedback. So, our excitement about the new media gallery here at the museum is the ability to put those technologies out and then watch people as they interact with them and use that as feedback into the R&D processes at HP, which I think makes it reinforces the strong relationship that HP and the museum have around that gallery. And the gallery, the roadmap for that gallery is a constant refresh cycle. Right. One of the challenges with any installation of technology is it ages pretty quickly. Yep. And so how do you plan for that refresh cycle? And that's already been built into the museum, really being an in situ lab for HP's perspective where that constant refresh cycle plays out.
Does anybody have a question? Raise your hand. Over here, let's...
Got one here and one up there.
Very good question for both of you, Paul and Phil. Could you take us back to the creation of the new media gallery and sort of what was the first overarching idea? What were the ideas you tried out? Which were the ones that might have fallen by the wayside? And give us the view from 30,000 feet as well as the granulars. Thanks.
So, give you a little backup, a little history. Pre the engagement with the museum, I was asked by Richard Edelman, who's the CEO for Edelman PR, one of the largest PR agencies in the world, to design the lobby of the new headquarters for Edelman in New York. Richard had found out that my original major in college was architecture. So he was, they were building this headquarters building, and he asked me to design the lobby to have a very rich media experience. So we designed this immersive media touch experience around news and media content, given the role that Edelman plays in that space, being one of the largest PR agencies. So I designed this. This was my midnight to 4 a.m. shift. I designed this wall and in the overall media experience. It gets installed into the new Edelman headquarters, and lo and behold, the Wall Street Journal ends up writing a story about it, and then all of a sudden I'm on the hook for 80 walls that I've got to build and install around the world. About that same time, we started the relationship between HP and the museum, and we talked about the wall, and there was some connections between the museum and Edelman, and they got a chance to see the wall, and we talked about the fact that when you think about where news is going, the news of the future, what kind of an experience can you convey, particularly not only to the kids, the youth that come here into the museum, but also the adults, to recognize that, as we jokingly say, not everything on the internet is true, but how do you teach the skills of discernment? What's curated content, and what's rumor, and what's propaganda, and how do you discern all of that given the flood and sources of news information? And what we determined is how can we create an experience that allows them to see and immerse themselves in both the new technologies, but also the new sources that information comes from. And so we started doing the mock-ups of some of the early concepts, and usually it's the HP Labs researchers I have to worry about getting way out on the edge. I had to go grab Paul and go, whoa, 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 bring it back here a little bit, We're good, we're not Buck Rogers.
Well, and the motivation from the museum was that we had done the Internet, TV, and Radio Gallery, which is a very sort of traditional gallery experience, and we realized almost as soon as we opened in 2008 that new media really was about participation, and that we had to build a gallery where the visitors could participate. And as we saw the evolution of Facebook and social networks, we realized people wanted to check in, they wanted to have their picture in the gallery, they wanted to vote on the stories, they wanted to build their own page, they wanted to post that page. And so we really created what we thought of as a three-dimensional social network in there, so people could really participate in a meaningful way, not just take a picture, but really engage in the content of that gallery. And what's been really rewarding for us is that we've gotten to such a tremendous response, especially from students and the younger generation, that they really feel engaged in that gallery. They really feel like it reflects what they do in their daily life, and so it's been very successful.
Yeah, I think Paul picks up on the key point, which was how do we create an interactive where it's a participatory activity, not a passive, you're just watching a clip or something like that. Yep. And the gallery opened in
April,
and the response has been incredibly strong, and
it's been great. So we're almost out of time. Was there another question up here? Here we go, up here. I have one last kicker question for him. I'm going to embarrass Phil.
So what would you say are the ingredients for success? You said that a lot of people coming out of college and educational institutions don't have what it takes to really succeed in technology and where technology meets life. What would you say it takes to succeed, and how do you develop that over years and decades?
The two fundamental skills, when I mentioned it to the U.S. Department of Education as to why what they're producing I'm not interested in, is it's really around creativity and the whole issue of critical thinking skills. Today we produce what I refer to as the world's greatest test takers. Given some of the policies that are in place. In fact, at AHP we would bring in 250 interns every summer into California, and about a dozen of them or so would be in my innovation team. And we learned this in the first year, and we actually modified it over the subsequent years, where we needed to literally unteach this concept that given a problem, there's one correct answer. In real life, there's never just one correct answer to a problem. There's a range of answers, and it's using your human ingenuity to discern and find all the possible answers to then figure out which one to select. So we would actually take the interns, group them down into teams of 3 and 4, and we would specifically give them problems that were unsolvable. You know, we would indicate that there was an answer. They needed to find the answer to the problem, and they would literally work themselves to death. About a 2-week period, pulling all-nighters, before they finally convinced themselves that, you know something, there's no answer to this problem, and that they needed to look at the problem in a completely different way. For me, when I'm interviewing and I'm hiring people, give me passion. Give me, you know, somebody who has an opinion. Alan Kay, who, you know, very famous inventor, primarily the guy who came up with the concept of notebook computing. When he was at Apple, he was an HP senior fellow. Alan had this famous saying is, I'll give you 10 points IQ credit for having an opinion. Don't sit there and just be quiet. Have an opinion. And then be willing to have rational thought and, you know, and be able to engage in a conversation as to why you believe what you believe. A lot of it is people waiting passively. Give me the problem and I'll go find the answer, versus how do you really show that passion, what your interest is. You know, doing a job that you're not passionate about, life's too short. You know, I can look back on my career and, you know, you get perspective of hindsight's 20/20, but, you know, I was fortunate enough to fall into a career that I was extremely passionate about. When I find students, whether or not they've got the technical skills, I can teach the technical skills. Fact is knowledge is a commodity. There's great universities all over the world. There's no unique position that we have in the U.S. that guarantees just because you get a degree in the U.S., you should be guaranteed a job. Knowledge is a commodity. It's that creativity, that ability to have critical thinking skills, and for me, when I'm hiring, it's passion. Show me passion. Show me an opinion that you've got in an area that overlays whatever industry that I'm operating in and I'm hiring for. That becomes, because I can do everything else. I can teach management skills. I can teach technical skills. I can mentor. I can't mentor passion.
Okay, this is going to be our last question. There's a sense that the technology world is on this precipice, that things are changing, that social media has disrupted everything, and that, of course, you know, the Facebook IPO was the second coming, and everybody was going to get rich by investing in Facebook. Hasn't worked out quite that way. Talk a little bit about what happened with Facebook, and talk about a company that you would put your own personal money into right now.
Ooh, wow. I don't know.
Take notes here.
I'm not all that big on
your
giving.
Your whole admission price today is about to be paid for.
Giving financial.
You will not be held liable for the
right,
failure. But Facebook, and then what would you invest in today?
Well, I think the challenge of any of the high flyers is really what's the long-term economic model that sustains their business. You know, Facebook has been working, you know, for a couple of years now on how to get to, you know, their advertising model and how they translate, you know, the millions of people that sit on Facebook to actually drive a revenue model. And in my case, you know, when I look at these kinds of companies, and I did this with Facebook, I actually went out and ran ads. And I did side-by-side comparisons of Facebook advertisement against my Google ads, promoting, you know, my book or whatever as kind of an apples-to-apples comparison. And Facebook still has a ways to go to get a business model that makes sense. I think Facebook's where a lot of the tech companies run into problems is the overhype. You know, they do think it's kind of the ultimate solution. Think about it though. You know, 7 years ago, there was no such thing as Twitter. Facebook didn't exist. There's no guarantee that just because Facebook exists today that it's going to be the thing 15 years from now. Google wasn't the first search engine. You know, there's always an opportunity for something new to come out that's going to replace, you know, whatever it is that's in place today. You know, being the incumbent leader puts a target on your back. You know, one of the benefits I had at HP in the PC business when I stepped in as the CTO there is we were number 4 in the market and losing $1 billion. When you're the underdog, that's a great position. When you become number 1, hard to stay number 1 because everybody's looking to knock you off your pedestal in the process. And I think Facebook and Google, LinkedIn, Apple, all run that risk of them being, the number one guys that are out there. To be quite honest, I don't do a lot of direct investment in the tech sector because I'm highly leveraged into tech already because I'm still a shareholder of HP and I have other investments, in the space.
So if he says Exxon, then we know we're in trouble, right? So you don't think technology is necessary, or there's no area in the technology field right now that you think is the exciting area where things are really going to take
Well,
off?
I think mobile is an exciting area. I think it will be quite exciting. I think some of the work in the new content and new kinds of content. I've always been a big fan in the gaming space, so whether that's Electronic Arts or Activision/Blizzard with World of Warcraft or Trion with Rift. I think those MMOG cloud-based is an excellent way to see where technology is going to go for the masses. From the standpoint of how are we going to consume, our content in the future.
So for those of you with teenage sons, invest in World of Warcraft. That's
Yeah.
the advice. That's the headline for today's program.
Yes.
I want to just say thank you to Phil McKinney. Thank you all for coming. And there will be a book signing out front, I think. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thanks.
All right, let's get you set up out there.